Now, if you did not, Patty, I don't think you got these 2 sheets of paper here. We passed these out last week, and we will be referring to these because I'm not a good artist. I was a great artist, I would put these on the board. The other thing is, I hope most of you got these Bible timelines. We have some back there. I don't know if there's any left over. But anyway, this helps put things into perspective. If you look at the back side of your timeline, you have the northern and southern kingdoms going into exile, and so it's kind of the second panel over on the back side. It says exile, and you'll see there Daniel and Ezekiel were contemporaries. Daniel is circa 620 to 540 BC. This was during the exile. Again, remember we talked about the fall of the northern kingdom, we talked about the fall of the southern kingdom, but the southern kingdom fell in stages. And so during the first captivity, Nebuchadnezzar took some of the cream of the crop of Israeli society, young men, brought them back, put them into his own training program for eunuchs. And again, we've taken a look at chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4 last week. And so we saw that Daniel was not willing to go along with this training program, and God blessed them as a result. We saw the image being set up, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, his 3 friends not being willing to cooperate, and so they're thrown into the fiery furnace, and there's the 4th man in the fire, and we've seen that. We saw the vision of the Colossus, and we're going to be coming back to that. Actually, this is probably the better page to take a look at. And we talked about the fulfillment of the different kingdoms with the Colossus. Now we're going to take a look at 2 more visions, if we have enough time, in chapters 7 and 8 this morning, and they tie into this same concept. These visions that we're going to talk about are so accurate that there are liberal Bible scholars who say Daniel could not have written it. He couldn't have known this. I mean, his accurate prophecies are so accurate. The interesting thing is, when we get into Daniel chapter 9, and even part of this prophecy that we're going to take a look at today, is that some of this is yet future. Well, if he nailed it, I mean seriously nailed it in the past, what's to say that he cannot do that again in the future? So he's in Babylon, he's in captivity, the Spirit of God has come upon him, and like Joseph of the Old Testament, what is a very unique spiritual gift that he's been given?
Interpretation of dreams.
Interpretation of dreams. And so he not only interprets dreams, but he is given visions himself. And so that's what we're going to talk about this morning. So that's the context of where we're at. All right, so when we get to Daniel chapter 5, we're going to see Nebuchadnezzar's son is now the king of the Babylonian Empire. And remember, we need to realize that there are different empires that we're talking about here this morning. Okay, remember you had Solomon's kingdom that was divided into north and south, Israel and Judah. Both have fallen. Okay, Israel, the northern kingdom, fell to the Assyrian Empire. It is now gone the way of all flesh, and the Babylonian Empire is the most powerful empire. They conquered Judah. You have Nebuchadnezzar, and you have Belshazzar. The Babylonian Empire is conquered by the Medes and the Persians. And so you see Daniel serving in both of these empires. You have to keep that separate, okay? And then you have King Cyrus giving the decree to rebuild Jerusalem. And then later on, as we take a look at these series of prophecies, we're going to see that Alexander the Great's empire from Greece, Macedonia, comes and conquers the whole area. When Alexander the Great dies prematurely, his 4 generals divide up the empire, and so you have the Ptolemies and the Seleucids fighting over the promised land. Then you have the Roman Empire coming and destroying all of them. And then Daniel's vision in chapter 9 seems to cease at the 69th week. And so many people believe that we are in this gap of time called the church age, the age of grace, the age of the Gentiles, whatever you want to call it. But we have still 1 week left of Daniel's prophecy, the 70th week, and that ties into these visions that we're going to take a look at. We have and will take a look at. Remember when we took a look at the Colossus, the legs of iron turn into feet and toes of what?
Clay.
Iron and clay, a mixture, and 10 toes. And we're going to see 10 horns, and we're going to, and so many people believe that you have the Roman Empire, and there's this gap, and then you see the revived Roman Empire, which is far weaker than the first one ever was. And out of that, this one little horn will pop up and control everything, which we call the Antichrist. We're going to take a look at one of the visions where many people believe that Antiochus Epiphanes was a prototype or a type of the Antichrist that is yet to come. Some people feel, oh, this has all been fulfilled already in history. Well, I don't agree with them. And for those of us who've been involved in the premillennial issue, what I see described here quite clearly is the coming millennium, when Jesus returns to earth and rules in a kingdom on earth. So, anyway, so Daniel is privy to all of this. So when we come to chapter 5 now, Belshazzar, this is the Babylonian Empire. He's Nebuchadnezzar's son. He throws a feast. And so, Mark, would you play, verses 1 through 6, chapter 5, in the Old Testament in the Bible.
Belshazzar the king made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine in the presence of the 1,000. While he tasted the wine, Belshazzar gave the command to bring the gold and silver vessels, which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple, which had been in Jerusalem, that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. And they brought the gold vessels that had been taken from the temple of the house of God, which had been in Jerusalem. And the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine, and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze and iron, wood and stone. In the same hour, the fingers of a man's hand appeared, and wrote opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's house. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. Then the king's countenance changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his hips were loosened, and his knees knocked against each other.
You can't make this up. I mean, this would be a perfect thing to read on for a scary night or whatever. Yeah. So you have this drunk king who suddenly sobers up immediately, and now he's scared to death. His knees are even shaking because he sees his hand appear out of nowhere and start writing on the wall. Now again, this is in Babylon, and this is a drunken orgy. And the thing where they cross the line is that they go take the sanctified articles, these sacred articles, these golden vessels that were meant for worship of the Lord in the temple, the tabernacle originally. And they celebrate this drunken orgy, start drinking to the gods of silver and gold, and God says, enough. And so he writes on the wall. And so he wants an interpretation. And of course, none of his wise guys are able to give an interpretation to what's there. And so the queen says, well, I know of a guy. I know of a man who the Spirit of the living God is in him. And this is Daniel. So Daniel comes and is asked to interpret this dream. And if you take a look in your Bible, we are going to kind of summarize this chapter to verse 25. It says, this is the inscription that was written. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. And it'd be interesting to see how they pronounce it. And the interpretation, so Daniel's able to read what this writing says, and he says then in verse 26, this is the interpretation of the message. Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and put it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. So this is a sign of judgment. interestingly enough, in his now sober, or perhaps still halfway drunken stupor, Belshazzar proclaims Daniel as number 3 in the kingdom and, dresses him up. That's, I'm sure, the last thing that Daniel wanted, because on that very night, the Medes and the Persians attacked the city of Babylon, and it was thought to be impregnable. It was one of the wonders of the ancient world. Well, the Medes and the Persians were brilliant. They stopped up the Euphrates River. And when the water stopped flowing, they just went down the riverbed, right under the wall, into the city, captured the city, killed Belshazzar, and now the Medes and the Persians are in charge of this gigantic empire. Now, if you remember, Daniel's Colossus, there was the head of gold, which represented Babylon, most powerful. Then you have the chest of what? Silver. Not as valuable as gold. So the Medes and the Persians were never as powerful as the Babylonians, yet a very, very powerful empire. So here's Daniel. Poor Daniel. Okay? But Daniel always landed on his feet. He was like a cat. God blessed him. The Spirit of God was upon him. And no matter what happened politically, he came out on top. That ought to be an encouragement to you and me. Because remember, Daniel was living in a godless society. He'd been yanked out of his own hometown, away from his religion, away from his language. He's now been told to serve in this foreign government, secular government, that is ungodly, and yet he maintains as a man of God in the midst of all of it. So it really should be an encouragement. All right, so now let's get to Daniel chapter 6. All right, the problem is not that the Medes and the Persians want to eliminate Daniel, because they see value in retaining some of these officials, and they see the value of a man like Daniel. Unfortunately, some of the other leaders are jealous of Daniel. And what sort of dirt can you dig up on this guy? Well, there isn't any. Okay, he is just about as clean as a person can be. Now, he's a sinner just like the rest of us, but I mean, he lives a very moral, upright life. And so let's get into, could you read, play verses 1 through 5 of chapter 6 of the book of Daniel in the Old Testament in the Bible.
It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps, to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. So the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no charge or fault, because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. Then these men said,
"We shall not find any charge against this Daniel, unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God."
Okay, very good. Would could that be said about any of us? You know, if people take a look at our lives, and we're not perfect, we're sinners, but we're living such moral lives that the only thing that they could find against us was somehow our commitment to the Lord. I mean, that would be a fantastic thing. You know, I don't want anybody to be judged, but Peter in 1st and 2nd Peter makes it very clear that Christians were suffering at this point already in the Roman Empire. And he says, you know, make sure that you're not suffering for doing something bad. Make sure you're suffering for doing something good and serving the Lord. So anyway, yeah, so this is what they have. So they come up with this scheme. And for those of you who know the chapter, what is the scheme? They talk the emperor of Persia, who is now King Darius, or Darius, depending on how you want to pronounce it. Darius, tomato, you know, let's call the whole thing off. What's the scheme?
Well, that only he could be worshipped.
Work with his pride, with Darius' pride. They know how to make a suggestion, and nobody can ask of any god any request except of you, O king. And if they do, they'll be thrown into the pit of lions.
For a period of how long?
They got eaten.
30 days. 30 days.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is for a 30-day period of time. Nobody's supposed to pray or address anybody else except the emperor. And Darius is flattered, of course, by this. He takes this suggestion and he signs it into the law of the Medes and Persians, which is irrevocable, okay, according to their law. Believe it or not, even these ancient kingdoms, godless kingdoms, still had laws, and they had to abide by them. So Daniel is fully aware of this law. Okay, it makes it very clear because in verse 10 it says, "Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and what does he do?
Kneeling on his knees 3 times a day.
Opens the window towards Jerusalem, where everybody can see him." And he's not doing this as a show. This is what he does every day, and has done every day. He continues to do what he's been doing, and that is praying to the one true God. He prays towards Jerusalem because that's where the temple once stood. And so, anyway, you know, they catch him in the act. They go to the emperor and say, "Guess what? Somebody is violating your law." And again, now the king, the emperor, values Daniel. He doesn't want to implement this law, but he can't ignore it because it's the law of the Medes and the Persians. Without getting into politics, in our country today, we do the exact opposite. It doesn't matter what the law says. Our officials just do whatever they want to do. Anyway, so what is interesting here is that this Medo-Persian emperor, this king, seems to have some sort of spiritual comprehension, okay? I'm not saying that he's a believer yet, but anyway, would somebody, if you have your Bibles, read verse 16 of chapter 6 for us.
Then the king gave orders, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den. The king spoke and said to Daniel, "Your God, whom you constantly serve with, will himself deliver you."
Okay. Now, he doesn't say God, but he says your God.
Your God.
Your God. And again, most of these societies at this point in time were polytheistic. Many of them believed in local deities. So Jerusalem had a god, you know, but Babylon would have its own god or whatever. And so anyway, he did wish him the best. So they throw Daniel in, they seal it with a stone, and that's where he's going to spend the night. And again, we can speculate all we want about what happened, but what I like to think, and this is my own pea brain at work here, is that lions were laying in the den. Daniel was probably a little bit cold, so he came over, he leaned up against a lion, snuggled up in his fur, and went sound asleep. That's what I have in my mind. The one who couldn't sleep was whom? Darius, yeah. Wondering, what in the world have I done, you know? Because this, again, Daniel is a very valuable leader. And so, anyway...
He may have been a little bit afraid of Daniel's God, too.
He may have. Yeah, superstition. Superstition. Right. Again, you've got the situation of Paul in Athens where he's going and there's these monuments to all these name gods, and finally there's one to the unknown God because they don't want to accidentally forget somebody, you know. So.
Interesting how it was sealed with a signet, like at the tomb, like
Yeah.
Calvary.
Very, and a stone rolled in front of it, stone rolled away. You know, Daniel comes out, yeah, very, very similar in that sort of a situation, except that the king is the one who's the most interested. And so if you take a look at verse 19, the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of lions. When he came to the den, he cried with a voice full of sorrow to Daniel, And the king spoke and said, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to deliver you from the lions? And all he hears is a roar from the lions and then licking their chops, right? No, not at all. Then Daniel says to the king, you scumbag, you're the one who threw me in here. No,
You come and get me out.
yeah, no, seriously. Daniel has this concept that God is in charge, God knows what he's doing, and he has great faith because he says, O king, live forever. My God has sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths so they have not hurt me, because innocence was found in me before the king and also before you, O king. I have done no harm. And of course it says the king was exceedingly glad. You know, he orders Daniel out. He orders the families and the individuals of these guys who perpetrated this in the meantime to be thrown in. And it says their bodies don't even hit the floor. The lions are so hungry that they chomp on them before the bodies can even hit the ground and break their bones. It just shows you how powerful beasts these were. And so, yeah, it wasn't that the lions weren't hungry, but God protected them. So, would somebody then read this fantastic epistle that King Darius writes? It's fascinating to me how God is at work through the Jewish people, even in these evil lands. We remember last week we took a look at King Nebuchadnezzar and how God humbled him and his statement of faith after he comes to his senses. Now would somebody read verses 25 to the end of the chapter?
Then King Darius wrote, to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men are to fear and tremble before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be forever. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. Who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions? So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian.
Okay. Miracle. Not only does he survive, but he prospers. God uses him and blesses him. So again, it's almost as if the Jewish people, the people of Israel, are contagious. They have this faith, and it can't be extinguished by them being moved out of Judah, out of Jerusalem, and they're rubbing off on other people, you know. And so here are two emperors who come to some degree of faith. I'm not saying that they're truly believers, but they obviously believe in this Yahweh, yeah, or Jehovah, or Yehovah, however you want to pronounce it. Okay. So, very good. So anyway, so because we're trying to summarize this and move very quickly, we're now going to jump into chapters 7 and 8.
Obese government.
So what we have here are historical sections, you might say. They record events that have been happening and how God is protecting and using these men of God, especially these four. Okay, but now we're going to switch gears, and in chapters 7, 8, and 9 especially, you have these visions now that are given to Daniel regarding the future. Now, putting this in context again, we recently studied the book of Revelation, and I made a statement then. Could we get those 2 sheets of paper maybe back to Virginia there? Because we're going to maybe refer to these a little bit. Again, I'm not an artist, so I haven't drawn all over the whiteboard. And there was a hand that wrote these words, by the way. A hand appeared and wrote on the wall.
We can see the handwriting on the wall.
You can see the handwriting on the wall, yeah. Very fortunately, it does not say meeny, meeny, tekel, upharsin on this morning. All right.
He would have said that in all caps.
Yeah. All right. So anyway, we're going to switch gears now, and I mentioned that in order to understand the book of Revelation, you really need to understand the book of Daniel. Now, really, you need to understand the entire Old Testament. Okay? But Daniel in particular has some visions regarding the future, his own future, and then the distant future. And it ties in with what we studied in the book of Revelation. So, yeah, you can start and stop here without any problem, correct?
Do you want, I can start to stop, but I can't restart in a different verse.
No, but in the same place.
Yeah,
Okay.
no problem with that.
Okay. So, what I think we'll do is, could you play the first 14 verses, first of all, chapter 7. If you've got your Bibles, we're in Daniel 7, and he's going to play the first 14 verses.
In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions of his head while on his bed. And he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts.
I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And four great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion, and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. And a man's heart was given to it. And suddenly, another beast, a second, like a bear. It was raised up on one side, and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to it,
Arise, devour much flesh.
After this I looked, and there was another, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there, in this horn, were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. 1,000 thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. I watched then because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. I watched till the beast was slain, and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Then to him was given dominion and a glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away.
Okay,
and his kingdom,
Sorry, go ahead.
the one which shall not be destroyed.
There you go. Okay. All right. So, again, if I remember correctly, and I forgot to look this up, this section of Daniel is not in Hebrew. This section of Daniel is in Aramaic. Okay? As if this is meant for the Jewish people of Daniel's day. Okay? And so, it is out of context, historically. So again, remember, we've already seen the fall of Judah, we've seen the initial captivity, we've seen the later captivity with the destruction of Jerusalem, we've seen Nebuchadnezzar's rule, we've seen Belshazzar's rule come to an end, and the Medo-Persian Empire taken over. Now, all of a sudden, we've jumped back, okay, to the very first year of Belshazzar's reign when we have this vision. So this is out of historical context. And so now we're taking a section here of visions, special visions that have been given to Daniel about the future and the ultimate future. All right. So this would be quite scary to see something like this. Now again, if you take a look at this piece of paper where it says the 5 great worldwide kingdoms, you're going to see a portrayal down below of these beasts. Okay, let's take a look now at the interpretation of what Daniel has just seen, and that starts in verse 15. And just go ahead and play the rest of the chapter.
Okay, do you want me to make it sped up a little or not?
No, it's fine. We're okay.
I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit within my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. I came near to one of those who stood by and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things.
Those great beasts, which are 4 kings, which arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever.
Then I wished to know the truth about the 4th beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron and its nails of bronze, which devoured, broke in pieces, and trampled the residue with its feet, and the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up, before which 3 fell, namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth, which spoke pompous words, whose appearance was greater than his fellows. I was watching, and the same horn was making war against the saints, and prevailing against them, until the Ancient of Days came, and a judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High, and the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. Thus he said,
The 4th beast shall be a 4th kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, trample it, and break it in pieces. The 10 horns are 10 kings, who shall arise from this kingdom, and another shall rise after them. He shall be different from the first ones, and shall subdue 3 kings. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and law. Then the saints shall be given into his hand, for a time and times and half a time. But the court shall be seated, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and destroy it forever. Then the kingdom and dominion, and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven, shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him.
This is the end of the account. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly troubled me, and my countenance changed. But I kept the matter in my heart.
Okay, so since we've got to go quickly, let me just give you an interpretation to this, and you can take a look at this if you want. But again, it is comparable to the Colossus, with the head of gold, silver, bronze, iron, and irons and feet of clay. So it seems like Daniel sees this whole vision, but doesn't always realize that there's a gap. And we're going to see this when we come to chapter 9, when it comes to the 70 weeks of Daniel. Again, 69 of those weeks you can chart what happened in the 70th week. Well, again, we believe in this gap period called the Age of Grace, the Church Age, whatever you want to call it, and that the tribulation would be the last 7-year period of time. And so what I believe you see have in this section here is you have Babylon, then you have the Medes and the Persians, then you have the Greeks. Alexander's empire is divided into his four generals. Then you have the Romans. Again, there's this gap. And then you have this final empire being extended. According to Nebuchadnezzar's vision, it had the feet of both iron and clay, 10 toes. Here you have the horns. And one of these becomes the ruler. And if you go over into the book of Revelation, I believe this is the Antichrist, and I believe that he tries to dominate the entire world, not just one section of the Middle East. It talks about his war against the saints, and again, I know that different Bible commentators will debate about that. Are we only talking about Israel, or are we talking about also the tribulation saints? Or are we talking ultimately here about all saints ruling with him during the period of time? Again, I don't want to get into that argument, but the idea is that what is going to destroy this world empire ultimately will be the coming of the Messiah. Okay? And God is still judge. We see that. He's ruling from heaven. He's fully aware of what's going on here on earth. And he sends Christ to the earth, who then destroys the Antichrist, destroys these worldly kingdoms, and sets up his own kingdom. And again, for this discussion that we've had about should premillennial be in the Alliance doctrinal statement, and praise God it was left in, I believe this is a premillennial discussion, that you have a literal kingdom be here on earth with the Messiah ruling and reigning in peace and justice during this period of time. So, again, because we got to move quickly, let's go on to Daniel chapter 8, which is, again, even a little bit more confusing. And so, let's, again, divide it in half. Let's take a look at the vision first, and then Gabriel, the angel Gabriel, gives Daniel this interpretation. So, let's take a look at verses 1 through 14.
In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one that appeared to me the first time. I saw in the vision, and it so happened while I was looking, that I was in Shushan, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw in the vision that I was by the river Ulai. Then I lifted my eyes and saw, and there, standing beside the river, was a ram, which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, and southward, so that no animal could withstand him, nor was there any that could deliver from his hand. But he did according to his will, and became great. And as I was considering, suddenly a male goat came from the west, across the surface of the whole earth, without touching the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. Then he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing beside the river, and ran at him with furious power. And I saw him confronting the ram. He was moved with rage against him, attacked the ram, and broke his 2 horns. There was no power in the ram to withstand him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled him. And there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand. Therefore, the male goat grew very great. But when he became strong, the large horn was broken, and in place of it, 4 notable ones came up toward the 4 winds of heaven. And out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. And it grew up to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and some of the stars to the ground, and trampled them. He even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices. And he cast truth down to the ground. He did all this and prospered. Then I heard the Holy One speaking, and another Holy One said to that certain one who was speaking,
How long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot?
And he said to me,
For 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed.
Stop. Just a little bit of a footnote here, and again, I don't want to be offensive, but this is where a large number of false religions that we have in our country today started, with verse 14 that was just read to us. You might say, how is that? Well, a guy by the name of William Miller, who was a Baptist preacher in the 1830s, read this and said, the 2,300 evenings and mornings are days, but really they're years. And so if you go back and you calculate forward, and the sanctuary being, well, that means that Jesus is returning to earth in 1843. And anyway, that didn't happen, obviously. But different groups broke off from that. You have the Mormons, you have the Jehovah's Witnesses, and most famously for us, you have the Adventists. And the Adventists came up with an interpretation that Ellen White popularized and still is being taught today by them, that the sanctuary needs to be cleansed. And so Jesus didn't return to earth, but he moved from one part of heaven to another part of heaven to begin what is called the investigative judgment. And that is what Jesus is doing today. And so yes, it was fulfilled, but not as they thought it was going to be fulfilled. Any number of Adventist pastors or leaders who have left their denomination have done so by saying, that's not what this says. That's not what is being talked about here. This is not the context at all. But anyway, so if you wonder where they come up with the doctrine of the investigative judgment, is all tied into that verse right there. Okay. So what is the interpretation? So would you play now the rest of chapter 8 for us?
Then it happened, when I, Daniel, had seen the vision and was seeking the meaning, that suddenly there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, who called and said,
Gabriel, make this man understand the vision.
So he came near where I stood, And when he came, I was afraid and fell on my face. But he said to me,
Understand, Son of Man, that the vision refers to the time of the end.
Now, as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep with my face to the ground. But he touched me and stood me upright.
Look, I am making known to you what shall happen in the latter time of the indignation. For at the appointed time, the end shall be. The ram which you saw, having the 2 horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia, and the male goat is the kingdom of Greece. The large horn that is between its eyes is the first king. As for the broken horn and the 4 that stood up in its place, 4 kingdoms shall arise out of that nation, but not with its power. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their fullness, a king shall arise, having fierce features, who understands sinister schemes. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He shall destroy fearfully, and shall prosper and thrive. He shall destroy the mighty, and also the holy people. Through his cunning, he shall cause deceit to prosper under his rule, and he shall exalt himself in his heart. He shall destroy many in their prosperity. He shall even rise against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without human means. And the vision of the evenings and mornings, which was told, is true. Therefore seal up the vision, for it refers to many days in the future.
And I, Daniel, fainted and was sick for days. Afterward, I arose and went about the king's business. I was astonished by the vision, but no one understood it.
Okay, first of all, having nothing to do with Daniel, there was a graduation ceremony. These high schoolers were there, and they wanted to pray, and they were told, no, you cannot pray or do anything spiritual at your graduation. So the speaker got up, and on cue, looked at the entire group of people and sneezed. And the entire group in unison said, God bless you. This really happened.
Wow.
This really happened, yeah. All right, so this is a little bit harder for some to understand. But again, since we're out of time, I'm going to give you my interpretation and what I've said before. If you want to disagree with me and be wrong, that's fine. I give you permission to be wrong. But anyway, what you have clearly here is the Medo-Persian Empire. You have the Grecian Empire, Macedonian, Alexander the Great, coming, destroying the Medo-Persian Empire. But he dies prematurely. Was it on the banks of the Ganges, and crying there was no more worlds to conquer. His 4 generals take over, and it's divided. But then it talks about this one horn that comes. But so many people believe that Antiochus Epiphanes, who came out of the Seleucid Empire, was a type of the coming Antichrist. But I don't believe that it is a total fulfillment, because when Gabriel comes, and by the way, when it says one like the Son of Man stood and instructed Daniel, gives Daniel the order, Gabriel the orders to interpret, I believe that's a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ that you have here. So Jesus Christ is commanding Gabriel interpret, and Gabriel makes it very clear that this is for the time of the end, when all of this has come to fulfillment. And so, yeah, the Grecian Empire and all this represents the empires of the world, the age of the Gentiles. Even in Bible times, they lived in a Hellenistic culture. So even though the Roman government was in charge, the lingua franca of the day was Koine Greek, and the Greek culture was everywhere. So anyway, the time of the Gentiles is going to come to an end. And there's going to be this one leader that comes out, who again I believe is the Antichrist. And this Antichrist is going to be destroyed. It's interesting that in my version, it says this, in verse 25, the last half, he shall also rise up against the Prince of Princes, but he shall be broken not by human hands. By the way, when I stood on the Temple Mount, between Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, I snuck over to our tour guide and I whispered to him, Ezra, do you think that's ever going to be torn down? And Ezra looks around to see if any of the Muslims were listening. He goes, not by human hands. And so, anyway, the idea here is that this Antichrist will be destroyed not by any sort of worldwide rebellion, but God himself is going, Jesus himself is going to return and destroy the kingdom of the Antichrist. And so then again, he says, therefore shut up the vision, for it deals with many days, and in the futures in italics. But it's, again, these are the end times when this is going to happen. And Daniel is just so overcome by all of this that he faints and is sick for days. Now, both these visions of chapters 7 and 8 happen during the reign of Belshazzar, during the Babylonian Empire. Now, next week, when we get into chapter 9, you're going to see the very first verse says, in the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of the line of the Medes, who was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans. So now we have the Medo-Persian period of time when Daniel gets this further vision. And this is the vision of the 70th weeks. And again, we see a spiritual battle taking place here. You know, Daniel is praying for wisdom, and is it 120 days? I can't remember now. That this answer is delayed and is delivered to him again by angelic messengers. And so, anyway, next week is going to be extremely important, and we're going to try to finish 9, 10, 11, and 12. But I want to spend a lot of time on chapter 9 because Daniel's 70 weeks, I believe, are key in understanding eschatology, Bible prophecy. So, all right. So what we've taken a look at so far in Daniel, we've seen that Jerusalem fell, that Daniel and his friends were taken captive, but they land on their feet because of their commitment to God. God protects them with the food. God protects the 3 friends in the fiery furnace. God protects Daniel in the lion's den. They go from the Babylonian Empire to the Medo-Persian Empire. Daniel's right there at the top. And their testimony is influencing the rulers of these evil empires. In the midst of all of this, then, you have this special vision that is trying to encourage the people of God that there will be a restoration, there will be a time coming when all these world empires are going to come to an end. You think it's bad now? It's still going to get worse, and that's what we talk about in the tribulation, the book of Revelation. But ultimately, God is in control. He's sitting in heaven. He's having his court. He judges them. He finds them guilty. Justice ultimately will come. One final comment. I love listening to John Lennox. He's a brilliant, brilliant expositor and what we would call an apologist for the Christian faith. And he debates these atheists. And one thing he says to them is this: for you who are atheists, there is never any justice, because people die without justice all the time. Some of these horrible rulers have died without being ever coming to account. Okay, so there is no justice if there's atheism. But if you're a theist and you believe in God and you believe what the scriptures have to say, there will be ultimate justice for all people and for everything that's taken place. And see, that's what you have taking place here. You have this great court, and the Ancient of Days is holding court, and someday justice will come, and there will be peace on earth. So, all right, we're out of time. Realize that was a quick run through, but again, we're trying to not do with the study guide. The study guide just wanted to do a couple little passages here and there. We're trying to summarize the entire Book of Daniel.